Hello and welcome to Season 13, Episode 27 of the Ubuntu Podcast. Today it's the 22nd of September, and this week we're going to have some community news and events, other big boy news, and that's about it, I think. With me this week we have Mark. Hello, Mark. How you doing?
Hello, Alan. I am well.
Good. And Martin. Hello.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. You all right?
I am on staycation, so I am tippity-top right now.
And what have you been doing on your staycation?
Well, so far, 2 days into the staycation, we have been walking my daughter to school and then walking to a pub and sitting in a beer garden in a pub, getting a suntan and drinking beer and ordering food until it's time to walk back to the school and collect my daughter. Very lethargic walks home, it turns out.
Interesting. That's not what it says here on my document.
Well, that's also the thing. So something else I've been doing is I've been playing games on Twitch. I've been playing Hot Shot Racing, Her Majesty's Spiffing, and Broforce.
Is this because you're a streamer now?
Yeah, I'm setting up a sideline in being the next big thing in game streaming, obviously.
So I know Broforce, and I can guess what Hot Shot Racing is. I've never heard of Her Majesty's Spiffing. What on earth? And why is it in uppercase?
Well, that's how it's presented. So the full name is Her Majesty's Spiffing, The Empire Staggers Back. And it was a crowd-funded game that was released in December of 2016. And it's a quintessentially British humour-based point-and-click adventure.
Ah.
So a couple of nights ago, I went on Twitch, had a bit of Linux chat with people that joined me on Twitch. I was asking, what games, I said, choose a game for me to play. Here are some options. And people suggested loads of things. And one of the suggestions was Broforce. So I got into playing that because I'd picked that up in Humble at some point. And then I later on said, well, let's give Her Majesty's Spiffing a go. And we completed the whole game. At the end of the stream, it took about 2 hours. And some of the podcast listeners joined and they were pitching in as how to solve some of the puzzles. But we got there and we finished the game. And it was really good fun. It's quite funny. Yeah.
Nice. Excellent. I'll have to take a look at that. Mark, what have you been up to?
I have been buying a camera for our nursery.
Ah.
Ooh. What kind of camera?
It's, I suppose you'd call it an IP security camera. So it's from TP-Link is the particular one we've got.
I know them.
But what I didn't want was basically a camera which would connect to the internet and broadcast my child's bedroom to the world. So I did a bit of research into such devices and found that TP-Link do this one under their Tapo home automation brand, which does connect to its own app, but also supports streaming over RTSP and a standard called ONVIF, ONVIF, which is a sort of standard for security cameras in general. If you have like a security camera management program, it like cameras supporting this standard can talk to it. And yeah, so it's basically a night vision camera, which I've got set up. I firewalled it off from the internet just in case it does then try to call out something else. But then my partner and I both have VLC on our phones. It connects to the RTSP stream, which we just have bookmarked. So if we need to see whether our child is in fact asleep or just pretending, we can just bring up the stream and see what's going on in there.
I'm glad no one's got a camera pointing at me at bedtime because I'm always pretending to be asleep.
So I've got a couple of observations on that. First, yes, small children pretend to be asleep. When you tell them it's time for bedtime, you actually have to explain the steps involved in getting to sleep. Every night for about the first 8 years is my experience. And second of all, Mark, congratulations on creating the world's nerdiest baby camera. Well done.
Yes, you can of course buy baby monitors with night vision cameras built in, but we've already got quite a good baby monitor, and the ones with cameras built in are unbelievably expensive. We're talking £100 plus for a lot of them, whereas this was like £25 for a camera which does all of the same things, just isn't branded as a baby monitor.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
It's even got two-way audio as well.
So you can say, shut up, go to bed.
I've tried singing through it, and it comes out quite creepy. So
the monsters under the bed are coming.
At the moment, we just use it to decide, has she actually woken up yet, or do we need to go and do something to comfort her, or has she settled herself? Whereas before it was like we had to open the door, and it was like Schrodinger's baby. She was both awake and asleep until you open the door, and then once you open the door, she's definitely awake.
Yeah.
Right. Let's get on with the show. Let's start with the community news. And first up in the community news, the Community Council is going to be revived from its deathbed. It's going to have a shock therapy, and it's going to get woken up again. This is after a lengthy thread on the Ubuntu discourse between some members of the community and Canonical people and Mark Shuttleworth himself. There was a conversation about the moribundness of the Ubuntu community and specifically the Community Council itself. And Mark stepped in and accepted that, yes, there were some failings that have happened over the years that have led to the point now where basically the Community Council consists of him and nobody else, which is not a good state to be in.
No.
And so Walter Wexel, as we call him, in the community, offered to step up and reset the clock and start the process of nominating people to be on the Community Council. And the reason why this is important is because the Community Council does a whole bunch of stuff. Unfortunately, a lot of it is dealing with rubbish that goes on in the community, stuff that gets escalated up, like conflict between people. But usually that kind of conflict gets dealt with lower down. I say lower, somewhere down in the depths of moderation here and there and admins and stuff like that. So often the Community Council doesn't have a lot to do, but I think it needed a reboot, and having a reboot perhaps will get some new blood on there who can drive things forward a little bit better. So
how can a person get on the Community Council if this is something they're interested in?
It's like, have you ever seen the CGP Grey video about how to become the Pope?
I have not.
It's not quite as hard as that. But so you have to be an Ubuntu member, and becoming an Ubuntu member is not supremely tricky, but if you make some kind of significant and sustained is the key phrase contribution to Ubuntu over the years, then you can become an Ubuntu member. And there are various ways of becoming a member through other means. You don't have to necessarily develop code, for example.
How big does the check need to be, Alan?
That's a common question, and I've never found out myself. So the nominations will be accepted for a period of 2 weeks until the 29th of September. So not long if you're listening to this soon after it went out. And as I said, you've got to be an Ubuntu member to be nominated. So you could approach someone who you think might be a good person to be on the Community Council, who is an Ubuntu member, and say, hey, you should be on the Community Council. And if they agree, then you could nominate them. Mark reviews the list, and then vote happens among the Ubuntu members who vote for who's going to be on the CC. And that initiates the next round of who stays on the CC for 2 years. I've been on it about 10 years ago.
I've been on it. They'll let anyone in.
Yeah, that's your bar. If they let me and him in, then yeah. So it was a lot busier when I was on it 10 years ago, because there are a lot more people around, a lot more people contributing to Ubuntu itself. Whereas now people are more contributing around it or building stuff on top of Ubuntu or building stuff with Ubuntu rather than building Ubuntu itself. So the community has changed, and so it'll be good to see what the new CC does with that community. Next up, Martin.
So I read with interest that GNOME is introducing a new versioning scheme.
Ooh.
So the next version of GNOME, due to be released in March 2021, will be GNOME 40.
So what is it at the moment? 3.38?
Yes, 3.38 is the one that is just emerging into final release status at the moment, which will be in Ubuntu 2010.
And then after that, it would be, call me old-fashioned, 3.39, which would be the development release.
Yes, that's right.
Would have been.
Yes.
Would have been the development release.
Yes.
but they're changing that, and it's going to be just 40 instead of 3.40. It's just going to be 40.
Yeah, and there's a few reasons for that. So although you've cited that 3.39 would have been the next development release, those would have been the development snapshots, which would then have emerged as 3.40 as the stable release.
Mm-hmm.
And it just so happens that by the miracle of coincidence, the 3.40 release coincides with the 40th release of GNOME. So they're choosing this point to drop the sort of now insignificant major version number because it's getting a bit untidy, 3.38, 3.39 and so on. So the next release will be 40 and they will have development cycles with the 40.alpha, 40.beta, 40.rc. And then there will be a 40.0, which will be the first stable release for that series. And then maintenance releases will be 40.1, 40.2, etc. And then the following release, which will come out October-ish, September-ish, 2021, that will be GNOME 41. So I quite like this.
Yeah, because it solves the problem of having the stable release being .0 while still having something that makes sense for the pre-releases.
Right. And I like this because it's kind of consistent with the way that browser releases happen now. They're just, a number that goes up with each significant release.
Mm.
I'm torn on this, partly because I really like the Ubuntu numbering system. And I saw in Emmanuel Bassi's conversation about this on the GNOME discourse that he mentioned, I think he called us the gold standard of date-based release numbers.
That's right.
And said people still manage to get that confused and don't know when 2004 came out or when 1804 came out. And I thought, okay, but really you only need it explaining once, but okay, fair enough. But I've also seen comments elsewhere, like on LWN, suggesting that this numbering scheme people just don't remember. Like right now, I could not tell you what version of Chrome, Chromium, or Firefox I have installed. I've no idea what that number is because they're all just numbers in the middle of the range somewhere between 1 and 100. And I couldn't tell you what any of them are. I don't know any of them.
Yeah.
And I feel that muddies things because you've got all of these mid-range teens and then up into the 20s, 30s, 50s, and it just becomes a mass of numbers. And okay, if I was in the GNOME community, then I might be interested in this number and it might stick in my head. But for normals, I don't think it will.
So I think your argument there is fair, although for browsers, right, they move really quickly. They're on some weeks apart their release cadence. I think it varies between like 4 and 6 weeks, depending on which browser you're looking at and where the cycle is. Whereas GNOME is going to continue with its 6-monthly release cycle. I like this because it drops the now superfluous odd numbers as development releases and development snapshots, which statistically
that is weird.
Nobody ever used. Now, Mate has adopted the same, traditional GNOME release numbering system.
So are you going to change? Are you going to switch Mate to be like, but you'd have to be like 20 or something, wouldn't you?
We're currently 24, so our next one would have to be 26 or something like that, right? So we're 1.24 currently. We've got our 1.25 snapshot releases out, and the next release would be 1.26.
You should totally do this. All the cool kids are doing it.
Well, that's what I'm told. I'm not in a position to sort of exercise this, single-handedly. We'd have to agree to do it. But it makes some sense. I mean, apart from anything, the way this new numbering scheme aligns with things like CI/CD pipelines is way more convenient.
Okay, what's next?
Well, I read without too much interest, but nonetheless, that Geary is adding transparent encryption and signing with GPG. So Geary is the default mail application for GNOME, is that correct? Or is that still evolution?
GNOME doesn't have a default mail client.
Oh, it doesn't,
really.
sorry.
No.
My mistake.
But it's part of the family, I think is fair to say.
It's a GNOME app.
Yeah.
It's built on the same
technologies.
GTK technologies, yeah.
It's written in Vala, isn't it? It's one of the suite of applications that, oh gosh, I can't remember the name of the foundation. Yorba, that was it. Yorba created that and Shotwell and a couple of others.
So something that is fairly interesting about this is that I also read this week about Thunderbird adding support for GPG encryption, which has been sort of requested since forever, but never actually built into Thunderbird. So it seems like something has catalyzed open source mail apps to focus on this all of a sudden.
That's good. If they can make it easy to use and not
that's the thing.
Painful and difficult for normies, then yeah, sure. I mean, if you want to send encrypted documents to a journalist or something, or an investigator or something, then you want a nice, easy way to do it. And normals aren't usually well equipped with the knowledge to do that.
Yeah, I think that's the key point, right? Is how do you make this stuff accessible to people that can use it in a meaningful way that are not us, our audience?
Yes.
And some time ago, I can't remember what the event was that happened on the internet, but weren't Google and everyone looking at introducing GPG encryption in a user accessible way? And that died on the vine and petered out. And I don't remember ever hearing why it never got implemented.
Snowden? Wasn't it around the Snowden releases that did it?
Yes, it was Snowden. You're right. That was what it was. Yeah. And everyone made a big play for we're going to be the next encrypted mail service. And then they all realized either that was hard or it ruined their business models and they shied away from it.
Cool. Well, I look forward to trying that out because Geary looks quite pretty. And it's always nice to have multiple options for email clients and not having just one monoculture of Thunderbird and not having everything in the web. Next up, Plasma 5.20 beta is out and it's billed as an absolutely massive release. There's some updates to the look and feel. They've got an icon-only task manager, so you don't have the text description. It's just icons, which is familiar to anyone who's used Windows recently.
Or Ubuntu.
Or Mac OS, for that matter. I think this is the new way of doing things.
It's de rigueur, isn't it? Yes. Smooth transitions for brightness changes. Aren't they always smooth, but in the gradient? I don't know. Can you get any more granular than like the 10 stages of brightness that you're...
I think they're referring to like the animation. That way it's actually presented on screen as opposed to...
okay.
Yeah.
There's some workspace behavior changes, new shortcuts. Of course, lots of configuration options, it says here. It wouldn't be Plasma if it wasn't. And you can set a battery charge limit to less than 100%, which I found interesting. So you can condition the battery a little bit.
Yeah.
Is that actually a thing? I've always been skeptical about stuff like that, especially these days.
I think it depends on the chemical technology in the battery.
If you've got like a nickel metal hydride battery, maybe.
Right.
So this is also limited to the devices stroke batteries that support it. So there's some intelligence behind it.
Right. Okay.
Smart monitoring for your hard drives, granular touchpad speed control. That's very helpful, especially if it works like agnostic of the chipset of the touchpad. Because I find many touchpads under Linux are really skittish and very difficult to use, which is partly why I turn them off and use a mouse. And some additional improvements under Wayland. So middle click pasting, screencasting supported, and other improvements.
That's a big one.
Yeah, that's really great. Good to see some improvements over in Plasma Land.
So I see your Plasma 520 beta improvements, and I raise you with Xfce 4.16 new features and improvements. And boy, howdy, this I can't believe I'm about to say this, but there is a ton of updates in this upcoming release of Xfce.
Excellent.
They've clearly been very hard at work. So they've now got a single status tray in the panel. And this one catches me by interest because this is work we've been doing in Ubuntu Mate and the Ayatana indicators. So like what we had two different implementations supporting old and new protocols, and we've condensed those into one, and they've done exactly the same thing. I think this and KDE are already there for some time. So that's great to see. And fractional scaling support has been implemented via Xranda. And this is more a developer feature, and I know this is going to be, a time saver for them, but they've dropped their legacy GTK2 code, which I know was like a moment for much popping of champagne corks in the Mate community when we did the same not so long ago.
Can you do champagne emojis under Xfce?
Yes, of course you can. Yeah, they're GTK3 now, so they've got access to the emoji pop-up chooser, just the same as everybody else.
Anything else big?
Well, there's just a ton of what I'd call quality of life improvements. So, new icons to, solidify their visual identity, client-side decorations for the settings dialog, so you can now search in the header bar when you're in the settings to move between the different control panel applets and what have you.
I hate client-side decorations. I hate it with a passion. But okay.
They can make the header bar look fat and oversized, but looking at the screenshots of how this has been implemented in Xfce, it's quite sympathetic. So it's been tastefully done, I think is the right way to point that out. And there's lots of attention to detail. So it's a pre-release right now. It's due for release in November 2020. So if you're a Ubuntu user, you'll probably have to wait until Ubuntu 2104 before you see all of this good stuff. But we'll have a link in the show notes to the exhaustive list of improvements.
Excellent. Next up, Mark, what else is new in software?
Well, Microsoft Edge is coming to Linux in October.
What?
Yes.
Awesome.
So this is Microsoft's Blink-braced...
It's easy for you to say.
Joe's going to leave that in, isn't he?
Yes.
Yeah.
Blink-based browser.
Okay.
Which, yes, until now has only been officially announced for Windows. But it sounds like we're going to have it on Linux as well as another option alongside Chromium and Firefox and Chrome and such like. And it's going to be available from Microsoft on their preview channel or from your native Linux package manager. So it sounds like they're going to be packaging it for the distros or possibly as a snap, and then that will be supported everywhere, right?
Or do they mean native Linux package manager? Does that mean there'll be a tarball on a website that you download and unpack it and then run the executable? I don't know.
It means Microsoft are making a native Linux package manager.
Yes.
And if you install
maybe
that.
So I've got a question for you, Mark, because you obviously work on big scale web applications for learning, and your development environment that you use at work is based on Windows. So I imagine you use the Edge browser.
You might imagine that. So each developer, as a requirement, has to test everything they do on at least two browsers.
Okay.
Usually I develop on Firefox and then I test on Chrome.
Okay.
Which is mainly out of habit. I think most of our users use Chrome, but our default browser in the institution is Edge.
Interesting.
That doesn't mean most people use Edge, but that's what they get to begin with. So there is testing done on Edge. There's also testing done on IE 11 because that's still sticking around for a while.
Okay.
For some of our users. But no, I've not done much with Edge myself.
Okay.
Cool. Finally, in the community news, the Ubuntu Touch OTA 13 release is out and contains a number of pull requests to address enhancements and issues all over the Ubuntu Touch system. And many have long-term benefits. I don't know what that means. There's updates to software, like, Qt is updated, loads of other bits and bobs under the stack. The browser, interestingly, is about 25% faster across all devices, which is welcome because the browser was a little laggy. So that's good.
Yeah, and that also sort of, goes down into the apps because most of the apps on Ubuntu Touch are web-based. So, this touches all parts of your experience.
Yeah. And they've brought back the previous icon-based system settings main menu. It says previously removed by Canonical during the final months of the project as some redesign happened, or I think as it was focused on coming towards the desktop convergence.
I see.
And it's interesting because I dug out a BQ E 4.5 just today and I turned it on and it was still running the original image that I had on it from years ago, from like 5 years ago. And it has the big fat icons. And so I thought, I know what that looks like, which is good because nice big fat icons, easier to press on a touch-based UI.
So I think the fat icons, I think Canonical removed them because they were struggling to make the UI work on like the E4.5 and the E5. And that's why it got slimmed down. But the way it's been implemented in this new version of Ubuntu Touch is it's for want of a better expression, responsive. So it knows if it can do it or not, and it will present them or not present them. And at least that's how I've interpreted what they've written in their release notes.
Interesting. There's some updates to the core applications, message, contacts, and dialer. They've got a whole bunch of updates, like little quality of life improvements, like the way text appears in message bubbles and stuff like that, and audio recording when sending messages has been improved and stuff. And there's a whole bunch of devices that are going to get support over the following week. Maybe by the time you hear this, they may be done.
Ooh.
There's a bunch of Sony devices, the Xperia series. There's a whole bunch of those, and the OnePlus 3 and the 3T.
Nice.
Which is interesting. Plus all the other devices that they have, like the Nexus 4 and the BQ phones and the Meizu MX4 and Pro 5 and the M10 tablet.
Yeah. So I have to say I was super impressed by the length and breadth of this update. The thing that that you mentioned, like long-term benefits. What are the long-term benefits? Well, there's been an effort to get Ubuntu Touch building on post-market OS. And by doing that, and the post-market OS team working on that, it's actually paved the way to Ubuntu Touch being built and delivered on Ubuntu 20.04. So that's your sort of long-term benefit for them to jump from 16.04 to 20.04.
Nice.
In the future, which will be amazing. But I'm definitely going to stick this on my M10.
When you think that the version that I was playing with on a BQ today was based on 15.04. So that's April 2015, a good 5 years ago. And they've had to massage this thing all the way through and now finally get it, like you say, building on the latest LTS is great. So yeah, if you've got a supported device, have a play with that and file bugs if you find them or get involved. And that's the end of the community news. And now it's time for some more big boy news. First up, Martin, what have you got?
So I found a story where the Wayback Machine and Cloudflare are teaming up to archive more of the web.
What does that mean?
So Cloudflare, which is a CDN that a lot of websites use, has a feature called Always Online. And the way this works is they make a static copy of your website and cache it in RAM on their massive CDN clusters at the edge. And if your origin server goes down, so your web server goes offline, people visiting your website will be delivered the static version of the site that Cloudflare have archived. And what they're doing is working with the Wayback Machine in order to feed the Wayback Machine with those statically archived versions of sites. So what that means is that the Wayback Machine is going to have access to way more websites than it currently indexes,
right,
and having the static data pushed into their archive platform.
Wow.
So that more of the Wayback Machine is relevant. But the flip side of this is that Cloudflare are going to be using the statically cached versions on the Wayback Machine to present when your site is down and you're getting the offline copy, you'll get the Wayback Machine, the most recent Wayback Machine version. So it's like both organizations benefit from this.
So at the moment, basically, the Wayback Machine relies on crawling the web and, periodically refreshing its version of each site, right? But this is basically a new data source for it.
Yes, it's a new data source, and I thought that the Wayback Machine was a crawler, but actually it turns out it isn't. It's like an index of 468 billion URLs, and they're adding 1 billion URLs a day at the moment or something crazy. But it is like a list of URLs that they index.
Oh, okay. And it just goes off and pings them as much as it can.
Right. But this is now another data source into that list of URLs that It will be archiving.
Well, the Wayback Machine also has contributors who can spin up VMs that get given work to do, like a distributed computing thing. And you can download. Yeah, there was a website recently.
Wayback Machine at Home.
Yeah, kind of. But they I think they're called like the Wayback Machine Strike Team or something like that. And they're spun into action when a company or a service says they're going to shut down and they have a lot of public data. And these people are given the seed URLs and they spin up the VMs, and these machines chug through, and they are like spiders, but you're doing it from different geographic locations. And that information gets fed back to the Wayback Machine. And I did it. I can't remember what website went down recently. It was some popular thing that had lots of data on it, and everyone was like, we're going to lose all this data.
The
quick.
Conservative Party HQ website or something.
And so they shone the Batman signal into the sky, and nerds all around the world spun up VMs with this stuff in and collected all the content and sent it off to the Wayback Machine. So yeah, it's good that they're getting more feeds.
Cool.
Next up, Melchior's Mansion is coming soon.
Oh, what's that then?
A new game. It's a game which is under development, so it's not quite out yet. There's a link in the show notes to the itch.io page, so you can follow the developer. Now, the developer has created a lot of games in the past, some of which I have downloaded and played on the Sinclair ZX81.
Wow, okay.
Hang on. You said new game.
Yeah, they are new games. He writes brand new games for the ZX81, and some of them are amazing. It's amazing what he can get out of that technology. Crossy Road, for example, the popular mobile now arcade game. You can go to arcades and play Crossy Road on a 42-inch plasma screen. He's implemented that on a ZX81. It's called Croxy Road with a ZXY in the name, Croxy Road.
Very good.
But anyway, Melchior's Mansion is a retro isometric affair. It's described on the website as a fast-paced, action-packed throwback to the classic games of the 80s in 15 glorious colours, hand-picked from the infamous ZX Spectrum colour palette.
This looks like a game I used to play on the Amiga called Cadaver, but you just described this as fast-paced, so I'm guessing it's not quite like that.
It's going to be available for the Windows PC, Spectrum Next, and Spectrum 128K, which is fantastic.
Hang on. So you obviously have Windows PCs in your ThinkPad collection, but you've got the Spectrum Next and you've got a Spectrum 128, right?
Yes, I have all of the supported platforms. Yes, I'm okay.
Yeah, okay, cool. And you talked about like the games that have been recreated on the ZX81. That's what 3 decades of experience developing on a platform does for you, right?
Yes, yeah. And I mean, it's very dedicated to be able to, some of the stuff. I mean, I remember like waiting for the screen to draw in some of the games, and how he manages to get full screen animations of something like Crossy Road as, you know, a little bird bounce. And I mean, it's obviously super pixelated because the ZX81 is super low resolution. But this particular game that we're talking about here is much, you know, it's more familiar if you've ever played Night Lore or any of those isometric 3D games, or Batman or Head Over Heels or something like that. It looks very familiar, room-based isometric thing. It looks great.
It does
and
look
I'm sure
pretty.
It will be fantastic because this guy's just a genius with what he can do with this software. Next up, Mark.
So I think a couple of years ago in the news segment, we mentioned that Microsoft was sinking an underwater data center off the coast of the Orkney Islands.
Yeah,
right.
And this was an experiment to see, basically, it was a proof of concept to see if it worked using the environment. So it uses renewable energy generated from the wind and the sea power, and it uses the water that it's submerged in for cooling using heat exchangers that are the kind that are designed for submarines. And they have resurfaced this data center to determine, you know, how it's been getting on.
Did it work?
And it seems like it's been fairly successful.
Huh.
I have questions you probably can't answer. Does this mean that nobody's been inside the submerged data center?
Exactly.
Correct.
No
Yes.
way. Really?
So they have said that the failure rate of the hardware over the 2 years has been about 1/8 of what it is for one of their normal data centers. And one of the theories for why this is that you don't have people going around replacing things and causing vibrations in the data center, which is a contributing factor. Another Another contributing factor is possibly the fact that there's no oxygen in the data center. It's filled with nitrogen, which is less reactive and therefore doesn't cause parts to corrode.
Holy cow. Isn't this fascinating? I love this.
Yes. So this is a long white tube with a Microsoft logo spray painted on one end, and it went under nice and pristine. And then there's some excellent pictures on Microsoft's website of it being jet washed to remove all the sludge that's built up over the 2 years and barnacles and the like. But it seems like it's it's done the job.
I'm going to have to look at this because I scuba dive.
Yes.
And I dived on a site called the Scylla, which was a deliberately scuttled ship that was sunk off the Bristol coast. And a whole marine life developed around it. So I'm wondering if these data centers, created an ecosystem around them. So I will be going off and reading more about this. It's fascinating.
Well, it was only a couple of years, and yes, all it took is someone with a power washer to jet wash off all of the barnacles that had collected on the surface, the smooth surface of this thing, which was interesting.
So it sounds like the idea of this is that they might use it to do sort of edge services on remote sort of coastal locations, or for cities with coastal locations, where real estate might be at a premium. You could just sink something in the harbour instead, perhaps, if you need a data centre nearby.
And finally, an old TV set has interfered with a village's DSL internet every day for 18 months. Who added this in here?
I think that was me.
So it says here that residents of a village in Aberhausen
That'll do.
were losing their broadband connection every morning at 7 a.m. And after investigations for electromagnetic interference and finding nothing, OpenReach tried looking for single high-level impulse noise, whatever that is, and they eventually traced the cause to a second-hand cathode ray tube television set owned by one resident, which he turned on every morning.
Yes, so this guy was getting up every morning at 7 p.m, sticking on his telly and taking out the entire village's internet.
Was it just like badly shielded, or?
Yeah, it was old technology and not up to modern standards in terms of the level of interference which it output, and I guess it just caused some power surge in the local infrastructure and took out everyone's internet, and they kept on having this happen every day like clockwork and couldn't understand why until they did this very specific last ditch detection for a particular kind of noise and found it was this guy's television.
I love these stories where something is going wrong and it takes a lot of investigation, and you have to think outside the box in order to determine what caused it. And reminds me, I think I've told this story before, when I used to work at Deloitte's in London, and there was someone's machine would get kicked off the network. It was a token ring network, and someone's machine would get kicked off the network reliably on like a Wednesday afternoon at a certain time or on certain days of the week. And it took us ages to figure out why this person's machine was getting kicked off from the network. And it was because there was another person who sat nearby who only worked part-time. And the first person only got kicked off the network when the second person was doing their shift. And it turned out that the two machines had identical MAC addresses burned into their token ring cards. So as soon as the second person arrived at work for their shift in the afternoon, turned the computer on, it kicked the first person off the network. And that took so long for us to figure out because, well, we didn't have the tools back in those days to figure it out. But yeah, it was, I love this kind of stuff. It's fantastic. More stories like this, please. And that's the end of the news. And that's all for episode 27. Thank you very much for listening. If you'd like to send us an email, you can do that by emailing show@ubuntupodcast.org. We like to read that out in the next episode, so listen out for your email in a future episode. We can't read it all out, but we do read it all to ourselves. And the super long ones we might cut down. And if you want your name to be removed from the email, then say so and we'll anonymize your lunacy or whatever it might be, or embarrassment. If you want to chat to us in the meantime, you can jump on our Telegram, ubuntupodcast.org/Telegram, and we'll see you next time. Thanks very much. Bye.